Hey Joe, really nice to see you again, and congratulations again on the launch. It's been quite a long journey, and we've
Yeah.
started together this report. What we started to work on it nearly a year and a half ago now, and it's finally published. And so many things happened in the meantime. So. I was wondering what initially stimulated you to work on this report.
Gosh, I know it is so long ago. It's hard to it's hard to even remember when we started. But I'm always stimulated to work on anything that can help businesses to practically reduce single-use plastic, I guess. And that was really what we wanted to achieve with this report, was more than it being a kind of academic publication and very theoretical. Then obviously those areas are really important, but we wanted it to be really practical. And I was quite drawn to the fact that it was going to be different, and hoping, that people who read it will be able to make sense of it very quickly and implement some of the recommendations in it quickly and easily in their business. So I'm very much I really am a practical person more than an academic person. So when I was first approached about it, I wasn't sure. But when I realized how it was going to change so that it could be written almost as, like almost a help kit, if you like, to give people really good ideas of something they could go away and implement straight away. And then it really did make sense to come on board. That's where our expertise is at Travel Without Plastic. So that was the real motivation to make change.
That's great. Yeah, that's actually is linked to what I wanted to ask you next, which is what do you think? I mean, having worked with so many different businesses for so long about this particular issue, um, what do you think the main challenges around the removal of SUPPs is?
I think it can be dependent on each business, to be honest with you, and there can be very different reasons for the challenges. But across most businesses, we do see one or two common threads. Normally, it's habit. So, you can imagine the accommodation businesses and other tourism businesses that have been around for so long, and some of the staff that have worked in these places for 20 or 30 years, we're suddenly asking people to change habits and standard operating procedures that have been around for ages. And we haven't necessarily made it easy to facilitate that change. And I think that's one of the big challenges, really, is the people aspect. And so, that's something that we address quite frequently through the work that we do. But also, I think confusion around the alternatives. What can I do? And by alternatives, we also mean maybe taking something away and not replacing it. So the alternative is actually nothing. When we use the word alternatives, people tend to think very quickly about another single-use item. And obviously, we don't want to just switch the problem from, okay, we've reduced single-use plastic, but now we've created single-use waste in another material. So trying to get people through that alternatives discussion, I think, in their own minds and then in the minds of their teams. And when they've got that far, we're quite realistic. You can't just take everything away, and not everything can be replaced with a reusable option. There's still got to be single use in some, areas as we transition. But it's such a complicated area. There's so much terminology that people don't understand. And I think over the course of the work that we've done together on the report, it's been great to see other reports come out to address that. And they've obviously been referenced throughout the report, so that we can't cover everything in those 40 pages, but we can point people in the right place that want to go for a deeper dive to really understand, that terminology, and then be able to make, decisions that fit for their specific business in their circumstances, in their destination, with their budgets, with all of these things that they need to think about. So I think the challenges, I say, are very different in different areas, depending where you are, depending what waste infrastructure is available to you, depending on your customer demographic and what the possibilities are within your business. But underlying it's really that kind of behavior change and habit change, and just switching, getting the switch to flip a bit and think about it in a different way.
Yeah, that's interesting that you talk about habits, because I think this will be even more exacerbated with COVID, because when we started, obviously we started way before COVID, and then it happened, and then we stopped, and then now it is, the report seemed to be even more important now because of all this proliferation of single-use plastic products post-COVID, and this perception that it is safer and so on. And so one of the things that I guess one of the challenges as part of this is COVID itself, and how to make businesses aware that there are alternatives, as you said. So how do you feel all of this influenced businesses in general, in terms of, the advent of COVID and so on? And also, we've seen that sustainability at the same time gained so much importance with COVID. And so it's almost contradictory, right? At the same time, businesses and people are more aware about sustainability importance, and yet they came to use more single-use plastics. So how do you see the change happening within this context, and how to help businesses with this issue specifically?
Yeah, I think it was really, in some ways, it was quite sad to see that there was such a quick switch back to single-use plastic. And I think it's fair to say that, most of the businesses that we spoke to that gave us insight for the report weren't happy to go back to single-use plastic necessarily, but there were local legislation, local regulations that forced them into it. So I think it's twofold on that. In some ways, they didn't have a choice. But I think COVID just came on us all so quickly that there wasn't even really time to plan for alternatives, in a processes or procedures or reusable way. So it was really a super quick reaction. And I think if we look back now, because we have had 18 months of it, we could probably look back and say, gosh, I think we overreacted a little bit. We didn't necessarily take logical decisions. And I guess from my perspective, because I've worked in health and safety and hotels for so long anyway, previously to coming into the sustainability arena, I've always had to look at, right, if we do something here for health and safety, what's the impact on quality assurance? What's the impact on the guest experience? What's the impact on sustainability? And how do we mix those together? So I'm probably coming from a place where I've always thought like that. And I think it through logically. And I think we made a lot of illogical decisions in many different businesses, many different sectors, not just tourism. But I think we've seen that sometimes, and it's supported now by that paper, which many scientists all, signed up to say single-use plastic isn't necessarily the way to prevent, bacteria and virus spreading. If anything, we can get really comfortable with it. And we forget it's still a surface. It's still another surface that we're all touching. And, when, I don't know where you're based in the UK, I'm based in the Canary Islands, we had to put gloves on to go into the supermarkets, in the first instance when COVID took off. And you'd watch everybody go around the supermarket, picking the phone up, moving their hair, sneezing into their gloves, which if you didn't have the gloves on, you'd probably be actually more careful about what you were doing with your hands. So they just gave this false sense of security. And it's the same with, all the little stickers that came out. So there's been this proliferation of green certification, and it's great that, the businesses want to do this and they want to give people that confidence. But I just, you put a sticker on the door to say the room's clean. You're like, well, is it really? Because the sticker doesn't clean the room. It doesn't magically go in and clean the room. It tells me that nobody has been into the room since the sticker was stuck on the door. It's your processes that clean the room. And so just putting stuff into single-use plastic or single-use anything else isn't that guarantee. It's the processes. And I think we lost that because we just had to react so quickly to it. So what we've been able to do, I guess, through the report, and we were paying attention to single use and hygiene anyway in the report, and health and safety. We know that you can't have glass around a swimming pool, for instance, for health and safety reasons. So it was always included, but we've been able to add that the extra information, the extra opportunities that COVID's given us to say, right, we need to make logical thought. And if we are saying sustainability is important, we've got to think, of course, people's safety is, but the two need to go together. And if COVID is with us for what, I don't know, 18 months, 2 years, maybe it's with us, for longer than that. But the plastic that we use today, the masks, the gloves, the aprons, they could be hundreds of years with us. So we can't just keep going back to that as the solution. And I think it's helped us now to think we need to be a bit more prepared, and we need to have longevity solutions in mind that don't create pollution at the same time.
Yeah, absolutely. And look at sustainability in a holistic way, I guess. It's so interesting you're giving this example of the gloves, because I got that a lot as well. And it would be great. I mean, what was great about the report, a lot of people from their feedback, what they liked is the decision trees, because these are concrete examples. So you've got, okay, one of the single use items that was sort of number one in terms of pollution in the sector was the water bottle. So we've done that for single use water bottles and for all the other 4 identified. And so the gloves, the gloves is one of yet another item post-COVID, let's say, if we were to make other decision trees. But also I remember you talking about the remotes. And then they were all wrapped in plastic, and all of a sudden everything was wrapped in plastic. Whereas in the report you mentioned that washing hands versus putting gel or wrapping things in plastic or using gloves or these kind of habits. So I guess all of these examples are very interesting, but at the same time, what do we need to do to make sure people are comfortable and know that these are the means? Is it through communication? Is it through education? Is it through both? How do you feel about this?
Yeah, I think, the report, I mean, it's brilliant. I would say that, obviously. I think it's great because it's got a lot of practical answers in there, but the report can't do it for anybody. So that we've got to take those recommendations in there and make them a reality. And reality is going to be different for every business. And I think it depends on both of those things. I think it depends on training and helping staff to feel confident that they can make those changes, specifically management teams. I mean, the book stops with them many times if there are issues, if there are ramifications from any decisions that we make, and they've got to think them through really well. But I think they need that confidence. They need to feel that if they're making a choice that doesn't create waste, but it can still keep guests and staff safe, then that's obviously the choice that we need to go with. And then I think the key point, as you mentioned there, is communicating that to the customers, because now, we can't go back from this. We can't unlearn what we've learned over the last 18 months. Everyone is going to be more aware, I guess, of health and safety now, and we need to communicate that, but we don't want to be doing it by just wrapping everything in single-use plastic. So beforehand in hotel rooms, you might have had information books. A lot of those have gone now as well. The information's on apps, or it's on television screens, where they've got their own channels in the hotels or those sorts of things. But there are still, people that would like to be able to flick through and see what it is. And whether we get that opportunity again, I don't know. But I think the important thing when it comes to communications is to think about where you're making that communication and what you're saying. So if you want people to feel that the filtered water is safe, let's say, if you've introduced a water filter system, the place to do that is probably on the actual water filter system, where people are going to make that choice right now to take the water. Our water's safe, blah, blah, blah. You can do that in a really nice way. If it's just kind of crammed into here is our list of COVID criteria or whatever it is that we're doing, it's too much. It's too much, and it's not necessarily in the right place. So I think if we can take, or if businesses can take 2, 3, or 4 specific communications and then think about, right, where are people going? Where do people stand still for ages? If it's in a hotel, it could be at reception. It could, quite controversially, I might say this, could be on the back of the toilet door. You know, where have you actually got time to read something? Just think about these places and what do you want to say in the lift. You know, you can change the signage in the lift, you know, every day. Most people do that to sell a product or to upsell a spa or a restaurant in the hotel or something. That's a perfect place to. And if it's something different every day, people will look and they'll read it. If it's the same message and you never change it, you know, it's almost like you don't see it anymore. So you get a little bit adventurous in those communications, because then, you know, people don't need to touch them. It's not a leaflet. It's not something you've got to create paper waste by putting a booklet in the room. There's lots of different ways, but again, very individual to circumstances.
That's really interesting, because we often tend to say, yes, we need to educate, yes, we need to communicate, but then we need to get creative with this. So basically, if I would wrap up what you were saying, it's about training staff, and sort of supporting them in this so that they are truly confident and they know and they're sure that this is following health and safety, so that they can communicate the message. But also the management needs to communicate to the customers in a creative way. So attracting their attention, using maybe different colors, different not the flyers that we want to get rid of, because we want to get rid of every single you know, every single use product, whether it is plastic or not. We'd better avoid that. So kind of things to stick on, as you said, elevator or somewhere else, and change that so that it attracts the customers and speaks to them as I guess. Now that's great. So maybe one last thing to wrap up. I was wondering what your thoughts were in terms of what do you think the report would bring to businesses, and what would you like it to bring to businesses, having worked with them for so long and knowing their needs? What are the main takeaways for them, and how would you like them to use it?
I think from a business perspective, I'd like them to use it to give them confidence, to help them to think differently, and to put into, you know, their minds to question changes. So don't always take, you know, terminology claims, marketing claims on alternatives as being absolutely, you know, truthful. Question those things and see if they are suitable in your destination and for your business, because it's not one size fits all, you know. And so we've had to be quite generic in the report, but I'd like to think that it just gives people that little, it switches on something where they think, you know, before I just go ahead and buy this alternative or make this change, I'm just going to look a little bit further into what this might mean and what the unintended consequences might be, because that's what most businesses come back to us and ask us for help with. Is we were approached by, you know, whatever company to put these alternatives in to take out plastic, and we thought it was great, and now we've realized it isn't. Now what can we do? And if we can just stop that in the beginning, or we can get people to think about that change first, so they don't go through the time. We lose a lot of time on that. They lose a lot of money on it. They lose a lot of faith in alternatives to single-use plastic. And some of them are really good, you know, and some of them aren't. And some of them are good in certain circumstances. So I would really like it just to hope it helps people to make a more informed decision about the changes they're going to make, whatever changes they are. And they're looking from the, you know, the policy side in there, because we've talked a lot about the businesses. There are policy recommendations, and, you know, it's that business moves really quickly. I think that's the thing. There's so much, you know, it's really dynamic in business. Changes come to the market really quickly, and public sector doesn't always and can't always keep up. And I think, so, you know, we need to somehow marry this, because some of the alternative products would work really well if the infrastructure was there to support their collection, separation, recovery, really bring that circular economy focus into play. And I think it's, how do we map these? And, you know, private sector is always going to go faster. What can the public sector do to keep up, or to narrow that gap slightly? And so I'd really like to feel that we can narrow the gap. But it is just a starting point. There's a lot to build on. I'm sure people will have you know, a lot more that they can contribute after reading the report, and ideas to share with us.
No, that's great. I think that from a business perspective, clearly when we're going, we're sort of building this report, we were looking at it more from a business perspective and to businesses and also to policymakers, to make sure they use it in the way you were mentioning now, and we hope they will. But what I've also noticed is that when I was talking about it to different people around me, to the team as well, my team, and to people like you and I and consumers in general, that were so interested. So from a consumer's perspective as well, it was so interesting to see that they were surprised by, the fact that you would say, oh, a plastic bag is not necessarily, if you use it 10 times, well, it has less of an impact and less of an environmental impact than a paper bag. And it was sort of eye-opening. So I think from if we were to see it from a consumer's perspective, is very interesting as well. And I truly hope that it will speak to consumers as well, although they were not initially the primary sort of audience, but these examples I felt spoke to them a lot, and they're like, oh wow, this is really interesting. So if I get a plastic bag and then I use it 20 times or 30 times, this means that it's less harmful than if I were to buy a paper bag or another type of bag and use it just once and throw it away, because there are other aspects of sustainability, such as the environmental impact, that needs to be taken into consideration, right? So it's really sustainability as a whole that needs to be looked at. So I don't know if you had anything else to add in terms of from a consumer's perspective again, because for instance, these examples, they will never go away from my head. And for instance, the gloves, the remote wrapped in plastic, or the plastic bag, and so on. So it's not a straightforward answer. But if you, I don't know if you had anything else to say from a consumer perspective, and also whether you wanted to say any other thing.
I think from a consumer perspective, it's hard for us as individual people to really be able to differentiate between that. It's not necessarily that there are good and bad alternatives, because a good alternative in one place would be a bad alternative in another, and if you use that plastic bag 20 times but then it's littered and you don't dispose of it properly, the scales tip again. So it really is that behavior change. But I think it's trying to help people to understand that that not every alternative is as green as it seems, and we've got to try where we can as consumers to ask those same questions that we're asking the businesses to ask of suppliers. But I guess what could happen is the businesses that are going to learn some of this or have it reinforced through the report, many of them knew this anyway, they could maybe think of more interesting ways to get that information across to the customer, so that we start to use the businesses as a means to communicate that. Because as a consumer, how many pieces of information are you taking in every minute of every day? Yeah. And we've got to make it easy for the customers to make the sustainable choice. So the easier a business can make it, the more attractive it is. If it helps people to feel that they're able to stick to the ethics they would have at home around recycling or buying differently, and they can do that when they're on holiday, when they're in an environment that's unfamiliar and they don't know how to do it, but your brand helps them to do that, then that's where we can really start to make a difference in behavior, I think, and help people live up to their own standards. And I think we can only go up, from there. There's a lot to do, but there's loads of good work that's happening out there. A lot of that's referenced from the appendix in the report with all the references on, where people can go out and get some extremely good ideas. And it's a starting point, and it's going to be really exciting to see where we go from here.
That's great. Thanks so much, Jo, for all your involvement. This has been a fantastic journey. I guess thank you for all your hard work, and let's keep tuned for maybe next step.
Very much a pleasure. Very much a pleasure. It was great.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Take care.